choose that day to go to graves of loved ones and zhuzh them up, change out the flowers, new plants, and things like that. So this is a very low-key thing. We're not making anyone do anything. But if you are one of those people, or think you might be this year, please bring your plants, and we'll list the who brought them in, and then who it's in memory of, and then you can take them to church. So that's all it is. But think about it. If that's going to be part of your Memorial Day weekend, it's a thing that we can do. Okay, so today is the last installment of the Art, Creativity, and the Sacred Sermon series. When Parish Committee meets next, we will decide that next year we will not do things quite as broad and encompassing as that. It's been a bit of a challenge to do that. But I wanted to just mention before we start that this one's a little bit lectury. So if you're into that, you're welcome. And if you're not, there's no more sermon series for the year, so next time I'm here it'll be all about, listening to birds or whatever. So today we narrowed down this topic a little bit because we have to each time just take this big concept and go, so for those of you who've been here or missed some, we did one on words, the meaning of words. We did one specifically on Amazing Grace, and through Amazing Grace examined hymn tradition. We did another one that I don't quite remember, and then Julianne Silberman Bunn did one. We had a guest preacher do one. So it's been fun. And today we'll be mostly talking about visual art and about houses of worship and how the physical space and the things we use to decorate it influence our experience here and how it reflects our tradition. So let's take a moment now in silence to think about how this sanctuary has functioned in our worship life. Now, please join with us in our first hymn, number 32, In Your Great Hymn. Now, thank we all our God. the recitation of our covenant. In the love of truth and in the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all.
Our first reading is from Basilica by R.A. Scotti, telling the story of the building of St. Peter's in Rome. If not the greatest story ever told, the creation of the Basilica of St. Peter is its epilogue. The narrative is written in the stones of the basilica and the landmarks of the city. Call it the power of an idea or divine inspiration. From what could have been a Tower of Babel, the artists, popes, and knaves who built St. Peter's incised the symbol of the transcendent Christ against the landscape of a city that embodied paganism. As the basilica rose, stone upon stone, the city of Rome grew with it. From the dust of the empire and the neglect of the Middle Ages, it became what Byron called the city of the soul. Time and again, construction collided with history and stalled. Emperors and kings, alliances and battles, heads that rolled actually and figuratively, egos that chafed, receded before the immutable presence of the basilica and its ability to inspire awe, to make the heart stop and the soul soar. Art triumphs over politics.
So our next reading is from 2 Chronicles chapter 2. So in the Hebrew Bible, there's of course many, many different styles and modes. Like if we were going to do another sermon or two about words and language, we talk about this more closely. Different styles and modes of writing. There's poetry, there's philosophy, there's theology, there's prose poetry. It gets pretty exciting. But in the book, there are four sort of like, and there's others, but like four in particular that like extremely historical. 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And they're pretty dry in many ways because they're trying to preserve documentary evidence of the history of Israel. And so this reading is from that. And it's part of basically a letter exchange, a contract exchange between King Solomon and King Hiram of Tyre, or Tyre, T-Y-R-E, Tyre, for our purposes. Just saying, hey, you know, I'm building a temple to God. I'd like these cool things. What do you want? You know, from me for that. And so it's like it goes on for a while. And this is part of the letter from King Hiram to Solomon, saying, yeah, sure, we can do that. We have a deal. Praise be to the God of Israel, who made heaven and earth. God has given King David a wise son, endowed with intelligence and discernment, who will build a temple for God and a palace for himself. I am sending you Huram-Abi, a man of great skill, whose mother was from Dan, and whose father was from Tyre. He is trained to work in gold and silver, bronze and iron, stone and wood, and with purple and blue and crimson yarn and fine linen. He is experienced in all kinds of engraving and can execute any design given to him. He will work with your skilled workers and with those of my lord David, your father. Now let my lord send his servants the wheat and barley and the olive oil and wine he promised. And we will cut all the logs from Lebanon that you need, and will float them as rafts by sea down to Joppa. You can then take them up to Jerusalem. Now let us take a moment in silent prayer to pray for those in need of our prayers today. Now, as Jesus taught us, let us pray. Parent God, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Now it is time for the offering, a free gift to a free church. We bring many gifts, and together build one church community.
Good morning. Our final reading is from Brunelleschi's Dome by Ross King. The book described the construction of the Duomo in Florence, Italy. The effect of the dome has been eloquently described by Alberti in his dialogue on the tranquility of the soul. Here he has the disillusioned politician, Agnolo Pandolfini, the man who finds solace for his troubled mind in fantasies about gigantic hoists and cranes, compare the state of spiritual calm to the peaceful interior of Santa Maria del Fiore, through which he strolls with his companion, Nicola de Medici, the failed banker. For Agnolo, the cathedral is an example of grace under pressure, of an ability to withstand the blows of fortune that he compares to adverse weather conditions that buffet the walls of the building but leave the beautiful interior pacific and unruffled. Within, one breathes the perpetual freshness of spring. Outside, there may be frost, fog, or wind, but in this retreat, closed to every wind, the air is quiet and mild. What a pleasant refuge for the hot blasts of summer and autumn. And if it is true that delight resides where our senses receive all that they can demand of nature, how can one hesitate to call this temple a nest of delights?
So after I made the order of service, I found another reading that I wanted to do. So that was the penultimate reading. We've talked about two cathedrals, and it seemed like we should have something a little closer to our own tradition. And I found this book in an antique store in Concord a little while ago, and it seemed it seemed topical today. This book is called Churches of Old New England. And it's by George Francis Marlowe, who was an architect from Framingham. I mean, he was from England, but he moved to Framingham as a young man because he married someone from Framingham, and went on to actually a fairly distinguished architectural career. I don't know if we have any Babson graduates, but he designed 11 of the original buildings at Babson College, so you can go see them today. He helped work on some Wellesley College. He designed Episcopal Church, which still exists in Framingham, and the Framingham Public Library. So he was an architect in the field of public buildings. And this book has us in it, which I thought was nice. So here's a way, in the 1940s, during the war mostly, he went around to local Congregationalist churches mostly, and churches in the Puritan style, and just sort of wrote a little travel log thing about it. And so this is what he had to write about us. One of the most charming, small, early 19th century meeting houses in Massachusetts is the Little Eliot Church in South Natick, built in 1828. Though the exterior is not elaborate, the tower, with its arched belfry and balustraded clock, stage, and corner urns, the whole surmounted by a lantern and vane, and the Palladian window and recessed doorway below, are all entirely pleasing in their simplicity. The interior is equally satisfactory, for any alterations that have been made are in keeping with the original work. Stairs on each side lead to the little white pulpit under an arch over the raised platform, and behind it is a corresponding arched motif on the wall, hung with a crimson drapery. The whole, rarely attractive and pleasing from an architectural point of view, yet in every way fulfilling the requirements of a non-liturgical service. The arms and backs of the white slip pews are finished with white walnut, and there are red cushions on the seats and a red carpet on the aisles. The seating is arranged with the always desirable center aisle, discarded for reasons of economy in the remodeling of so many old churches. Nicely designed stairways on each side lead to a little gallery over the entrance for the organ and choir. Here's the only unsatisfactory feature of the interior. The ceiling is so low over the gallery that the tops of the organ pipes disappear into the space above. Bill can tell you what happened to the organ pipes. Now our next reading is our response reading 444 from our great hymnal by Kenneth Patton, who was a very prominent Universalist minister during the war and after, during the Second World War and after, and he was most prominent as a hymn writer and liturgist. And we actually read this usually on In-Gathering Sunday or Kickoff Sunday. He has another one which we also read on the other Sunday. He was good at like early in the year readings. This house is for the ingathering of nature and human nature.
It is a house of friendships, a haven in trouble, an open room for the encouragement of our soul.
It is a house of freedom, guarding the dignity and worth of every person.
It offers a platform for the free voice, for declaring, both in times of security and danger, the full and undivided conflict of living.
It is a house of truth-seeking, where scientists can encourage devotion to their quest, where mystics can abide in a community of searchers.
It is a house of art, adorning its celebrations with melodies and handworks.
It is a house of prophecy, outrunning times past and times present in visions of growth and progress.
This house is the grave of our dreams, the workshop of our common endeavor.
Now let us turn, same hymnal, to 211. We are climbing Jacob's Ladder. We sing this every once in a while, but it's been a while. So listen carefully while Steve plays it through. Please rise.
If I stumble, will you help me? If I stumble, will you help me? If I stumble, will you help me? We are climbing on. Though the road is steep and rugged, though the road is steep and rugged, though the road is steep and rugged, we are climbing on.
So, back when I was homeschooling my middle son, the two of us would head into the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston every Friday. He would take art courses in their homeschool program, and I would set up in some corner of the building, surrounded by the art of the world, and write my sermon for the week. Now, I was never a very good visual artist myself. In fact, my report card in my junior year of high school told my parents that Adam has yet to find his medium. Obviously, that was traumatic, because I still remember it. But I've always appreciated art. Art elevates the soul. It points towards something beyond us that is hard to explain. It puts us in dialogue with the divine. You see, this house is for the gathering and ingathering of nature and of human nature. It is a house of friendships, a haven for trouble, and an open room for the encouragement of our struggle. And with the vision of others in this room as we share and support each other, we have a house. We have this church house, and it houses the art and is actually art itself, even if it's a little low-key. Now, sitting in one of the galleries at the MFA, which, as you know, I assume most of you have been there, it's quite grand, I couldn't help but be inspired, no matter what the subject of that week's sermon was meant to be, and no matter how my day was going, outside the sanctuary of the museum. To borrow some words from Ken Patton again, it is a house of art, adorning its celebrations with melodies and handiworks. Yes, Patton, even though we are talking about churches, Patton was also talking about churches. Even though we were talking about a museum, Patton was talking specifically about houses of worship, not unlike this one. But the fact remains that art, wherever it is in our lives, assists us on this spiritual path. In fact, this sermon was not written in a museum, and it was not written here in the church. I wrote it at a picnic table at Moore State Park in Paxton, Massachusetts. And doing that has its advantages. There's something to be said for immersing oneself in the glory of nature, reminding ourselves of the vastness of creation and our small place in it. But really, both experiences, the experience of nature and human nature, are necessary and valid. In fact, they work together. The art of nature alone often appears chaotic to us, made up of systems within systems. That was a different sermon series. You can look it up. Systems within systems that we don't completely understand. So what we do with our limited vision is correct for this vision through art, through human creation, by each of us sharing what we find interesting. So if you go to Moore State Park, you will see art. in the broadest sense. There's a gazebo and an old mill dam. And there are chairs set up to frame certain views, to make the human sense of the infinite more human. The park, as in so many places, in the park, as in so many places, another person or group of people like us has chosen to frame a small part of this holy world that we live in. A small part for us to study and experience more closely. And framing that world, or human experience, making art, is a tremendous responsibility. So maybe that's why King Hiram of Tyre sent Hiram Abi, at the time a legendary artist, to help build the temple in Jerusalem. I am sending you Hiram Abi, a man of great skill, trained to work in gold and silver, bronze and iron, stone and wood. For without the right artistic eye, the dialogue between human beings and the divine would be hard to perceive. A house of worship is a house of art, says Ken Patton, where we engage with the sacred. And when we engage with the sacred through art, we do it in many ways. Preaching, readings, prayers, and music constitute the performed elements of our worship today, for example. But the space where we do these things, this actual physical space, is also important. As we inhabit and interact with this church building, from sitting in the pews to hanging our banners and messing with that sticky side door, the building, teaches us something about the world around us and about the concept of and our own participation in sacredness. Now, at its most basic level, the way we interact with physical art, whether it's painting or sculpture or architecture, is the same as with other things. Those things we've already talked about in this series. Things that are spoken, read, or sung. In a sense, whatever the medium, we engage in conversation when we engage in art. The photographer Ansel Adams tells us that there are always two people in every picture: the photographer and the viewer. There's always two people in every picture: the photographer and the viewer. To which I would add one more party, though it isn't always a person, namely the subject of the work. To me, that space in between the original creator of a work, the person seeking meaning, and the image or subject framed by it, that space in between is where the divine is most present. For the three parties, the creator, the observer, and the subject, all bring their own life experience, their own joys and sorrows to the moment, and together they create a dynamic exchange between them. Art, whether we are talented makers or sensitive consumers, art forces us to create meaning. And a temple, whether it is a temple to a particular faith like a church or synagogue or mosque, or to an idea like a museum, the temple makes the most of this interaction. Now today, as I mentioned earlier, two of our readings were about cathedrals. Big houses of worship. Maybe some of you have been to one or the other, or maybe both. Large temples to a particular religious tradition, which is not surprising. The same feeling the MFA creates can be magnified in an explicitly religious setting. Leon Battista Alberti, in his book, The Tranquility of the Soul, has one of his characters talk about the sacred calm of the air within the Duomo in Florence, Italy. Within, one breathes the perpetual freshness of spring, he writes. Within, one breathes the perpetual freshness of spring. Outside there may be frost, fog, or wind, But in this retreat, closed to every wind, the air is quiet and mild. Now, of course, a great sanctuary creates an environment that is ideal for contemplation, for a tranquil soul. That's what sanctuaries are for. However, that only works if we bring ourselves to it with intention. Alberti's church today can be loud and chaotic as tourists compete for a better view of that famous dome. And that is not at all tranquil. For a religious setting to be contemplative, it needs a religious or contemplative dialogue partner, namely the worshiper. The worshiper who inhabits the house of worship. And that's us. Now, sacred architecture reflects the personality of those inhabitants, the life and preferences of those worshipers. So the dialogue between artist, observer, and art evokes a slightly different spirit depending on where or who we are. R.A. Scotti notes that when St. Peter's was finally completed, the Basilica was truly Catholic, incorporating in one supreme construction the conviction of numerous popes and the genius of many architects. If you compare that to the lines of our own sanctuary, where neither popes nor genius architects took any interest, as our reading noted from about our church is entirely pleasing with its simplicity, with the whole, rarely attractive, and pleasing from an architectural point of view, yet in every way fulfilling the requirements of a non-liturgical service. That's not the way people talk about great cathedrals. People don't write florid prose about these churches, but we've certainly read a bunch about others. Those great cathedrals are designed for the ritual demands of the high church, but it is a way. Okay, I'm sorry, distracted. We had someone peek. Actually, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Someone just came to take a look at the sanctuary. So that's not the way people talk about great cathedrals, designed for the ritual demands of the high church. But it is the way people talk about houses of worship built in the humble style of a democratic faith. Our theology, the theology of this congregation and our tradition at large, cannot sustain a priesthood with a special connection to the divine, nor can it sustain a communion where the physical presence of Jesus inhabits the bread and wine. But we do have a robust theology of something. And that something is meetings. Is meetings. James Luther Adams, the great church historian, said about us, "By their committees you shall know them." We have this theology of meetings and of service projects of any kind, really. This house, says Patton, is a cradle for our dreams and a workshop of our common endeavors. So our church, our meeting house, reflects the desire to find the divine in each other as we work, worship, and meet together, rather than the desire to seek God outside the world. And even though meetings may not sound religious, the Eliot Church building stands as an effective sacred object. The art and architecture of this place, representing the Puritan minimalism of our tradition, is designed for a conversation with God that may be very different from the one had by other people in other congregations. But it is our conversation. It is our conversation. Those clear glass windows, the tiny white pulpit, and even the profusion of red cloth that seems to be notable back in the 40s are still a part of how we function in worship today. Now, it may still be the same carpet, But since the 40s, we've added some things, haven't we? There's that new plaque. There's a new wooden cross that blends into the background. Even this tinier pulpit from the other church may not have yet been present. The vases of Walter Donald Crane, a former minister. And every once in a while, we bring out the sacred baseball. And so it should be. The relatively blank walls are meant for us to tell an ongoing story, not beholden to the cathedrals of the past. Instead, it is designed for a reformed and reforming people, constantly questioning, constantly thinking about the meaning of things. Now, I've spoken enough about this space and others, and about art in general. And I could keep going. However, let's not. Let's take a moment now to notice once again our surroundings, the graceful, the awkward, and the mundane parts, and let it speak to us. Oh, I'm nice. Sure. Final hymn. I got communion break. I was like, oh, we got another one. So, hymn number 115, God of Grace and God of Glory. Please rise.
He went to the and then he texted me, and